Welcome, everyone, to Chronicles of Heart. If you're new to stories that uncover profound humanity in our history, you're in the right place. Before we begin this incredible journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Most importantly, click the bell icon to turn on notifications. This helps our community grow and allows us to bring you more hidden stories of hope and resilience every single week. Now, let's get started. The inherited shadow. The afternoon sun, thick and golden, poured through the broad leaves of the oak trees in the Tanaka family's backyard. It was a kind of perfect, serene suburban Saturday that felt designed for a lifestyle blog. The air hummed with the quiet industry of lawnmowers in the distance and the scent of freshly cut grass. In the center of this picture-perfect scene, Ilera Tanaka, 28 years old and sharp as a new tack, meticulously arranged a bouquet of orchids and lilies in a crystal vase on the patio table. Her movements were efficient, precise. She had purchased the flowers minutes ago from an upscale urban market that listed their carbon footprint on the label. Her world was one of optimized algorithms, curated wellness, and digital efficiency. This visit to her grandfather's house was a scheduled item on her weekend calendar, a task performed with genuine love, but also with the faint, unspoken impatience of someone who believed time was a currency to be spent, not simply passed. Across the lush green lawn, her grandfather, Kenji Tanaka, existed in a different dimension of time. At 89, his movements were a slow, deliberate ritual. Dressed in simple worn trousers and a soft cotton shirt, he tended his rose bushes with a monk's concentration. His gnarled, weathered hands, which sometimes struggled with a simple coffee cup, became instruments of profound gentleness as they cradled new bloom or carefully snipped a dead head. He spoke to the plants in a low, soft Japanese, a private language between an old man and his memories. Ilera watched him for a moment, a soft smile playing on her lips. "The florist said these should last 2 full weeks," she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet hum. "They're hydroponic. Apparently, it's a much more sustainable model." Kenji paused his work, looking up slowly. His eyes, dark pools behind wire-rimmed glasses, held a kindness that seemed to soften the edges of the world around him. He offered a faint, knowing smile. "A flower does not know it is hydroponic, Ilera-chan," he said, his voice a soft, gravelly whisper. "It only knows if the water is clean." Ilera sighed, though not unkindly. She was accustomed to his cryptic, philosophical answers. They were part of his charm, but sometimes felt like a barrier to a more straightforward conversation. She glanced down at her smartwatch, its screen flashing with a notification from a project management app. "I just don't get how you have the patience for all this," she said, walking over to stand near him, her clean sneakers sinking into the soft grass. "The waiting, the weeding, it seems so unnecessary," he offered, not looking up from a particularly vibrant crimson rose. "I was going to say inefficient," she finished with a light laugh. Kenji's smile faded slightly. He carefully laid his pruning shears in the basket at his feet and straightened his back with a soft groan. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the shift in his demeanor. The gentle grandfather was receding, and the man who had lived a history she could only read about was coming to the surface. "Efficiency is for factories," he stated, his tone losing some of its softness, gaining a new gravity. "Gardens require care. It is a different kind of work. The kind I learned a long time ago." He turned his gaze back toward the roses, but he was no longer seeing them. He was looking through them, into a different time, a different landscape. Ilera felt a familiar pang. She had heard the fragments of his past her whole life. A childhood in Kyoto, the dark cloud of the war, his capture in the South Pacific. It was a historical abstract, a chapter from a textbook, not a lived experience that had tangible weight in her modern life. She knew he was a veteran of the Imperial Japanese Army, but his service was a closed book, its pages stuck together with a pain her family had quietly agreed never to pry open. "In the war?" she asked gently, sensing the shift. "Grandpa, you don't have to." "It was not in the war," he interrupted, his voice low and steady. "It was after." He took a deep, slow breath, as if steadying himself to step onto a fragile bridge spanning 7 decades. The scent of damp earth and blooming roses hung heavily in the air. They told us we would be slaves, he began, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the distant past. They told us the Americans were monsters who would skin us alive. Our officers told us to save the last bullet in our rifle for ourselves. So when the gates of that camp in the middle of Colorado closed behind us, we expected hell. We prepared our souls for it. Ilera was completely still now, her phone forgotten in her pocket. She had never heard this part. The after. Her knowledge of prisoners of war was shaped by Hollywood and history documentaries, tales of escape and deprivation. This was new territory. But the first thing they gave us was not a club, Kenji continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a bewildered awe that had somehow survived intact for 70 years. Or a whip. He paused, the memory still vivid, still disorienting. It was a bar of white soap. And then they led us to a mess hall. They gave us a hot meal. Real food. Steak. Potatoes. Gravy. More food on one tin plate than I had seen in 2 years. A confused frown creased Ilera's brow. This narrative didn't align. It was dissonant, clashing with everything she thought she knew. Compassion for the enemy was an abstract concept, not a historical reality. But why? She asked, her voice barely audible. You were the enemy. Why would they do that? That, Kenji said, a profound sadness in his eyes, is a question I ask myself every single day, as we build our own theater to perform kabuki plays, as we formed baseball leagues and played against the guards, as we were paid with coupons for our work in the fields, to buy cigarettes and Coca-Cola at the camp canteen. He shook his head slowly, the memory still a source of quiet marvel. We called it Yorikobi no Mura, the village of joy. Some of us, in our secret letters home, we called it a paradise on earth. The word hung in the air between them, absurd and powerful. Paradise, a prisoner of war camp. The two concepts crashed together in Ilera's mind, impossible to reconcile. It felt like a beautiful, heartbreaking delusion. Before she could form a response, the sliding glass door from the house hissed open. Her cousin Marcus strode out onto the patio. At 30 and home on leave from his third deployment, he moved with the boisterous, confident swagger of a modern soldier. His army fatigues were crisp, his posture ramrod straight, a stark contrast to Kenji's gentle stoop. Hey, sorry I'm late, Marcus announced, his voice loud and cheerful in the quiet garden. Traffic on the 405 was an absolute beast. What's going on out here? Grandpa telling you his wild POW stories. He said it with a wide, easy grin, but Ilera caught the subtle, dismissive edge in his tone. He walked over and clapped Kenji gently on the back. Crazy, right? Marcus continued, not waiting for an answer. Guess we were just softer back then. Can you even imagine? Giving the enemy stake in baseball? Letting them put on plays? Today, the media would crucify us for being that weak. We'd be called traitors. The word, weak, landed in the peaceful garden with the force of a physical blow. Kenji flinched almost imperceptibly, his shoulders rounding as if to protect himself. The serene atmosphere he had cultivated for decades shattered in an instant. The past was no longer a fragile story being shared. It had become a collision of worldviews, and Ilera found herself standing directly in the path of the impact. The paradise her grandfather described was suddenly under attack, and she felt an unexpected, fierce urge to defend a history she didn't yet understand. A crack in the wall. The word hung in the air, toxic and abrasive. Weak. It seemed to suck the very oxygen from the garden, leaving a vacuum filled only with the distant drone of a lawnmower. Kenji's hands, which had been so steady amongst his roses, now trembled slightly. He didn't look at Marcus. Instead, he looked down at the soil, as if searching for an answer buried deep beneath the roots. Ilera watched the light in her grandfather's eyes dim, replaced by a weary, familiar resignation. It was a look she'd seen before, a curtain drawn quickly over a painful window. A hot, unexpected flash of protectiveness surged through her. Marcus, Ilera said, her voice sharper than she intended. It's not about being weak. Marcus turned his easy grin toward her, completely oblivious of the damage he had caused. Come on, Laura, you know what I mean. It's a different world, a different military. We have rules of engagement, psychological profiling. We're precise. Handing a defeated enemy a soda pop isn't precise. It's messy. He said messy like it was a synonym for foolish. Kenji slowly bent down, picked up his wicker basket of gardening tools, and without a word began to walk toward his small tool shed. His silence was more powerful than any argument. It was a retreat, a withdrawal from a battlefield he never wanted to be on. "Grandpa, wait," Ilera said, taking a step toward him. "It is okay, Ilera-chan," he said softly, not turning around. "The sun is getting strong. This old man should rest." The door to the shed closed with a quiet, definitive click. Marcus finally registered the tension he'd created. He shoved his hands in his pockets, a faint look of confusion on his face. "What? Did I say something wrong? I'm just talking history." "You're not talking history, Marcus," Ilera snapped, whirling on him. "You're judging him. You're calling the most profound experience of his life weak and messy without having the first clue what it was actually like." "Whoa, easy there," Marcus said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I didn't mean to offend the guy. It's just hard to relate, you know? His war and my war, they're not the same planet." He walked over to the patio table, picked up a deep red rose Kenji had cut earlier, and twirled it absently between his fingers. "It's just a story he tells." And that was the heart of it, Ilera realized. To Marcus, it was just a story. A curious, outdated anecdote. To her, in this moment, it felt like something far more vital. It was a truth she had never been offered before, a side of her grandfather he kept locked away, and Marcus had just mocked it into silence. "It's not just a story to him," she said, her voice low and intense. "He called it paradise, Marcus. Paradise. Can you even wrap your head around that? What kind of hell must you come from for a prison camp to feel like paradise?" Marcus shrugged, dropping the rose back onto the table. "I guess. Look, I'm sorry I upset him. I'll apologize later. I gotta run, meeting some guys down at the VFW." He gave her a quick, perfunctory hug. "Don't get all worked up about ancient history, Lara. It's a beautiful day." And with that, he was gone, his large truck roaring to life in the driveway and shattering the quiet once more. Ilera was left alone in the buzzing silence of the garden, the word paradise echoing in her mind, now tangled with the thorny, dismissive word weak. She looked at the closed shed door. She thought of the fear in her grandfather's eyes when he spoke of expecting hell. She thought of the utter confusion in his voice, describing a bar of soap and a hot meal. This wasn't ancient history. This was a living, breathing memory that shaped the gentle, quiet man she loved, and she had just seen it get trampled. She couldn't just let it go. The need to understand, to defend this fragile piece of him, became an urgent compulsion. She marched into the house, through the tidy, traditional living room, and into the small, dim study that smelled of old paper and sandalwood. This was Kenji's sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were crammed with volumes in both English and Japanese. On the walls were faded calligraphy scrolls and a few old black-and-white photographs. Her eyes scanned the shelves. There had to be something more. A diary? Letters? Something that could prove this wasn't a delusion, that this paradise was real. Her search felt frantic, almost invasive. She pulled down a heavy photo album from a high shelf, its leather cover cracked with age. She flipped through pages of family photos, weddings, birthdays, the documented history of their life in America. Then, tucked in the very back of the album, behind a picture of her own christening, she found it. It wasn't a photo. It was a single yellowed piece of paper, carefully folded into quarters. The paper was thin, almost translucent at the creases. With a trembling hand, she unfolded it. It was a letter, written in an elegant, fading Japanese script. At the top was a printed heading, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, civilian Internee mail. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Her Japanese was rudimentary, learned from childhood dinners and phrases from her grandfather. She could pick out characters, but reading it was impossible. But she didn't need to read it all. At the bottom of the page, below the dense blocks of text, was a postscript, and this was written in a clumsy, hesitant English, as if the writer knew the censors would be reading. The words were a seismic shock to her soul. Do not worry for me, my beloved Michiko. The Americans are not what we were told. They treat us with a kindness I do not understand. It is so strange here. We have full bellies. We play baseball under this wide blue sky. It feels like a dream. It feels like a paradise on earth. It was real. It wasn't a story softened by time. It was there, in his own hand, written in the moment, to the wife he feared he would never see again. He had used the exact same words. Paradise on earth. Ilera sank into her grandfather's worn leather desk chair, the letter held gently in her hands like a holy relic. She looked out the window at the garden, at the shed where he had retreated. She thought of Marcus's scoffing his certainty, and she knew, with a conviction that shook her to her core, that her cousin was wrong. This wasn't weakness. This was the most stunning and radical act of resilience she could possibly imagine. The courage to have your entire world shattered, to have your hatred disarmed by simple, inexplicable decency, and have the strength to write home and tell the truth about it. She had no more. The single letter had opened a door, and Ilera knew she couldn't close it until she walked through. She had to find out what happened in that camp. She had to understand the kind of strength it took to call your captivity a paradise. The keeper of the flame. The letter felt like a live wire in Ilera's hands, humming with the energy of a truth she had never anticipated. The elegant, fading script and the clumsy English postscript were a direct line to a young, frightened Kenji, a man she had never met. She carefully refolded the precious paper, her mind racing. She couldn't just confront him with it. The wound Marcus had opened was too fresh. She needed context. She needed proof that extended beyond her grandfather's memory. Her first instinct was a modern oracle, the internet, sitting at his old oak desk. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She searched Japanese POW Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, her heart pounding with historian's thrill. The results were a confusing jumble. A few academic papers, a Wikipedia entry with dry statistics about capacity and dates, and, overwhelmingly, forum posts from historical hobbyists and contentious political debates. She found herself falling down a rabbit hole of conflicting narratives. Some comments echoed Marcus's sentiment, calling the camps a propaganda tool or a historical anomaly. Others vehemently defended the policy, citing the Geneva Convention. It was noise. It was arguing. It was everything her grandfather's simple, profound letter was not. She needed a human connection, a voice, not a digital echo chamber. Scrolling deeper, past the forums and the news articles, she found a link to a small, locally run historical society website for Sparta, Wisconsin, the town nearest to the former Camp McCoy. The website was charmingly outdated, a relic of early 2000s web design. There was a tab labeled Oral History Project. With a click, she found a list of interviews, mostly local farmers talking about the Depression, veterans from later wars. And then she saw it, a single entry, buried near the bottom. Interview subject, Harold Hal Perkins, deceased. Role, guard, Camp McCoy, 1944 to 1946. Interview date, June 12, 2002. Her breath caught in her throat. A guard, someone who had been on the other side of the fence. Without a second thought, she found the contact email for the Historical Society's curator and typed a frantic, passionate email. She explained who she was, about her grandfather, about the letter she had just found, and her desperate need to understand. She asked if there was any way to access the full interview with Mr. Perkins. She half expected to wait for days, or never get a reply at all. To her astonishment, her phone rang 15 minutes later. The area code was Wisconsin. A warm, slightly raspy woman's voice was on the other end. Ilera Tanaka, this is Marnie Jacobs. I'm the curator here at the Sparta Historical Society. I got your email. Ilera was stunned, fumbling for words. Oh, Mrs. Jacobs, thank you so much for calling. Please, call me Marnie. Honey, I've been waiting for a call like this for 20 years, the woman interrupted, her voice brimming with excitement. Hal Perkins was my uncle. I conducted that interview myself. He talked about your grandfather's camp until the day he died. Ilera's eyes welled with tears. A connection. A real, tangible connection. He did, was all she could manage to say. Oh, yes, Marnie continued. He said it was the strangest duty he ever pulled. They were expecting fanatical enemy soldiers, you see? They were trained for violence, for escape attempts. And what they got were mostly scared, exhausted boys. Uncle Hal said the biggest problem they had for the first month was convincing them to take the soap. They thought it was poisoned. Ilera let out a wet laugh, wiping her eyes. That detail, so small and so human, perfectly matched the bewildered tone in her grandfather's letter. Uncle Hal wasn't one for grand speeches, Marnie went on, her voice softening. But he told me something once I never forgot. He said, Marnie, we won the war on the battlefield with bullets, but I think we won the peace in those camps with baseball games and full stomachs. He said watching those boys slowly realize they weren't going to be tortured was like watching flowers bloom after a long winter. The metaphor was so close to Kenji's own life in the garden, it sent a shiver down Ilera's spine. I have to know more, Ilera whispered into the phone. Is there any way I could get a transcript? Or the recording? Tell you what, Marnie said, her tone decisive. The recording is old on a cassette tape. The quality isn't great, but I can digitize it for you. There's something else, too. After the interview, Uncle Hal gave me a box of his things from the war. There's a photo album. I think you should see it. Ilera's heart leaped. A photo album? Yes, ma'am. The guards weren't really supposed to have cameras, but you know how boys are. He sneaked one in. The pictures aren't of fences or guard towers. They're the baseball games. The vegetable gardens the prisoners planted themselves. There's one of a group of young men building a stage for a play. They're all smiling, really smiling. Ilera could barely process it. Visual proof, not of imprisonment, but of life. Marnie, I don't know how to thank you, Ilera stammered. Don't you thank me yet, Marnie said kindly. You listen to that recording. You look at those pictures. And you understand what your grandfather lived. That's all the thanks I need. It's why I kept all this stuff. For a day when someone from the other side would come looking for the truth. They said their goodbyes, and Marnie promised to email the files within the hour. Ilera sat in the quiet study, the morning's conflict with Marcus now feeling a million miles away. She wasn't just defending her grandfather's memory anymore. She was on a mission of discovery. She was about to meet the young version of Kenji Tanaka through the eyes of the very man tasked with guarding him. The ping of her email arriving broke the silence. With trembling hands, she opened the audio file Marnie had sent. She plugged in her headphones, closed her eyes, and pressed play. A man's aged, crackling voice filled her ears, thick with Midwestern accent. Well, now the Japanese boys... He began, and Ilera was transported. She was no longer in a sunny California suburb. She was on the wind-swept plains of Wisconsin, standing next to a young Hal Perkins, looking to the wire at a young Kenji Tanaka, who was not an enemy, not a prisoner, but simply a boy far from home, being shown an unimaginable kindness. The story was no longer his alone. It was theirs, and now it was hers. Through the wire, the crackle of the old recording filled Ilera's ears, a sound like distant campfire static. Then Hal Perkins's voice, weathered and warm as an old barn board, began to speak, pulling her across decades and continents. Well, now the Japanese boys, they were a puzzle to us at first, Hal began, his tone conversational, as if he were sitting right there in the study with her. We was told they were ruthless, you see? That they'd rather die than be captured. So we were tense, I don't mind telling you. Finger on the trigger, so to speak. Ilera closed her eyes, picturing it. The young, nervous American guards, the even more terrified Japanese soldiers, a chasm of fear and propaganda between them. But then, nothing happened. Hal continued with a soft chuckle. No uprising, no trouble, just this quiet sadness. It hung over the camp like a fog. You could feel it. They didn't sing. They didn't laugh. They just moved around like ghosts. It was the eeriest thing. He paused, and Ilera could almost hear him shaking his head in remembered bewilderment. The change started small, real small, The commanding officer, a good man named Captain Riggs, he insisted on the rules. The Geneva Convention, full rations, medical care, no exceptions. Some of the fellas grumbled, called him soft. But he'd say, we're not them, we do this by the book, and we go home with our honor intact. Ilera thought of Marcus and his definition of strength. Captain Riggs's words sounded like a different, deeper kind of strength altogether. Then one day, Hal said, his voice brightening, it was a hot afternoon. A few of us guards were playing catch with a baseball outside the barracks, just killing time. And I noticed them, a group of the prisoners, watching us from behind their wire, not with anger, with interest, like kids watching a candy-making machine. Ilera held her breath. On a whim, I guess, I tossed the ball over the fence. Just a lazy, underhand toss. It rolled to a stop at the feet of this one skinny kid. He just stared at it like it was a live grenade. We all froze. This could go real bad, I thought. The tension in Hal's voice was palpable, even 70 years later. Then, real slow, the kid bends down and picks it up. He holds it, turns it over in his hands. And then he looks right at me, and he gives a throwback. It was a weak throw, all arm, no shoulder. But it was a throw. It cleared the fence. I caught it, and for a second, we just looked at each other. Then I nodded, and he nodded back. That was it. That was the whole thing. But it was like the first crack in a dam. Tears streamed down Ilera's face. She could see it perfectly. The simple, silent exchange that spoke volumes. It was the antithesis of everything Marcus believed, a moment of connection, not conquest. After that, Hal's voice became energetic, joyful. It was like a fever took hold of that camp. They loved baseball. Loved it. We got him gloves, bats, balls. They formed teams with names like the Tokyo Tigers and the Kyoto Kings. We'd play them on Sundays. They were damn good, too. Quick, disciplined. They'd bow to the umpire before every at-bat. Can you imagine? Bowing. Ilera could imagine it. The formality, the respect, woven into the very American fabric of the game. And it wasn't just baseball, Hal went on. They asked for seeds. Can you believe it? Seeds. They wanted to grow their own vegetables. Daikon radishes, squash, things we'd never seen. They turned a barren patch of dirt behind their barracks into the prettiest garden you ever saw. They'd give us extras sometimes. My ma got a Japanese squash from that garden, and she talked about it for years. The recording ended with Hal's voice growing soft and reflective. We were enemies on paper, but inside that wire we were just fellas. You spend enough time next to someone, even with a fence between you, you start to see the man, not the uniform. I think about those boys often. I hope they made good lives. The audio file clicked off. Ilera sat in profound silence, Hal Perkins's humanity lingering in the room. She immediately opened the digital photo album Marnie had sent. The images were grainy black and white, often slightly out of focus, but they were devastatingly real. There were no pictures of barbed wire or guard towers. Instead, she saw a group of young men in mismatched uniforms, their faces alight with concentration as they slid into a base. She saw them kneeling in a garden, tending the plants with the same careful focus her grandfather now used on his roses. And then she found it, the photo Hal had mentioned. A group of prisoners were building a wooden stage. They were shirtless in the summer sun, muscles straining as they hoisted a heavy beam into place. And they were smiling, not for the camera, but at each other. It was a smile of shared purpose, of camaraderie, of creation. And there, on the edge of the frame, holding one end of the beam, was a young man she recognized instantly. The eyes, even in the grainy photo, were his, the set of the jaw. It was Kenji. He was looking at the boy next to him, and he was laughing. It was a sight she had never, ever seen in any other family photo. A look of unburdened, youthful joy. This was the paradise he remembered. It wasn't about the steak or the soda. It was about this, the reclaiming of his humanity through a game of catch, the taste of homegrown vegetable, the shared labor of building a stage for a play. It was a simple, staggering gift of being treated like a man again. She printed the photograph. She held the warm paper in her hands, staring at her grandfather's laughing face. The fragile, precious truth she now held felt enormous. She couldn't keep it to herself. She had to show him. She had to show Marcus. She found her grandfather not in the shed, but sitting alone on a bench at the far end of the garden, staring out at the fading light. He looked small and tired. "Grandfather?" she said softly. He turned, and she saw the lingering hurt in his eyes. She didn't say a word. She simply walked over and handed him the printed photograph. He took it, his hands trembling more noticeably now. He pulled his glasses from his shirt pocket and put them on. He looked down, and time stopped. His breath hitched, a sharp, ragged intake of air. His fingers traced the edge of the photo, then hovered over the image of his own young face. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down his weathered cheek. Then another. He didn't sob. It was a quiet, profound release of memory he had held locked tight for a lifetime. "Hal San," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He had a camera. He looked up at Alara, his eyes wide with wonder and confusion. How did you find this?" And Alara Tanaka, her own face wet with tears, sat down beside her grandfather in the twilight and began to tell him the story. The Village of Joy. Kenji Tanaka held the photograph as if it were made of glass, his thumb gently stroking the image of his own youthful, laughing face. The twilight deepened around them, painting the garden in shades of violet and blue, but he was no longer in California. He was in Wisconsin, feeling the rough wood of the stage beneath his hands, hearing the shouts of his friends calling plays in a baseball game. "Hal San," he whispered again, the name a key turning in a long locked door. He was a good man. He had a terrible pitching arm. A real, genuine smile broke through his tears, and it was the most beautiful thing Alara had ever seen. For the next hour, he talked. The stories poured out of him, not as fragile fragments, but as a rich, vivid tapestry. He told her about the thrill of their first baseball victory against the Guards, and how Captain Riggs himself had awarded them with extra coupons for the canteen. He described the intense focus of building the kabuki stage, the arguments over carpentry, the pride of performing for an audience of American soldiers who couldn't understand a word but stood and applauded until their hands were red. The paradise was not the food or the safety, Alara-chan, he said, his voice strong and clear now. It was a return of choice. The Americans gave us back the ability to choose to play, to choose to grow, to choose to create. When you've been a soldier, a tool of war, to be given back your humanity, that is paradise. Alara listened, her heart full. She had given him a gift, but he was giving her a far greater one. The true meaning of his resilience. The following evening, Alara asked Marcus to come back over. She didn't explain why. When he arrived, he was still wearing his fatigues and his same slightly defensive, jovial attitude. "Look, Laura, I said I was sorry for upsetting Grandpa," he started, holding up a six-pack of beer as a peace offering. "This isn't about an apology, Marcus," Alara said, her voice calm but firm. "It's about understanding. Please, just sit down." Puzzled, Marcus sat on the patio couch. Kenji was already in his chair, a quiet dignity about him. Alara didn't hand Marcus the letter. Instead, she played Hal Perkins's voice through her phone speaker. She watched her cousin's face as the old guard's crackling voice filled the quiet space, telling the story of the thrown baseball. Marcus's smirk faded, his brow furrowed in concentration. He listened to Hal talk about the tension, the fear, and the moment it all broke with a simple game of catch. He didn't interrupt. Then, Alara handed him the printed photograph. "Look at it, Marcus. Really look at it." Marcus took the picture. His eyes, trained to assess and analyze, scanned the image. He saw the makeshift stage, the shirtless young men, the shared labor. And then he found his grandfather's face. He saw the joy, the unburdened laughter. He stared at it for a long, long time. The photograph did what words could not. It bypassed his arguments and spoke directly to his heart. "When was the last time you saw Grandpa laugh like that?" Alara asked softly. Marcus didn't answer. He just kept staring at the picture, his own rigid posture beginning to soften. The ideology of weakness he clung to crumbled in the face of this undeniable evidence of shared humanity. Kenji leaned forward. "Marcus," he said, his voice gentle but unwavering, "you asked me to imagine your war. Now, I ask you to imagine mine. Imagine being taught that your enemy is a monster. Then you meet him, and he acts like a man. A good man. It does not make you weak to admit he is good. It makes you strong enough to see the truth." He paused, letting the words sink in. What they gave us was not weakness. It was strategy. A strategy for peace. It is easy to create more hatred. It is the hardest thing in the world to end it. They ended it for me in that place. They turned an enemy into a friend. That is not a messy policy. That is a victory. Perhaps the greatest victory. Marcus finally looked up from the photograph. His eyes were shiny. The defensiveness was gone, replaced by a dawning, humbled awe. He looked from the picture of his laughing grandfather to the old man sitting before him. I never thought it like that," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're taught to dehumanize the enemy. It's Tactics 101. It makes it easier to do the job." He shook his head, as if seeing his own training in a new critical light. "But they did the opposite. They rehumanized you." Kenji nodded. "Yes, they gave me back my name. They did not see a prisoner. They saw a pitcher, a gardener, an actor." Marcus stood up slowly. He didn't go to Kenji. Instead, he walked to the edge of the patio and looked out at the darkening garden. His shoulders slumped not in defeat, but in thought. The lesson was working its way through him, challenging everything he thought he knew about strength and honor. He turned back around, his expression transformed. There was a new respect in his eyes. "Paradise on earth," Marcus said, testing the words, now understanding their true weight. It wasn't about the place. It was about the people. Kenji smiled, a peaceful, full smile that reached his eyes. "Yes, it has always been about the people." Ilera watched them, the old veteran and the young one, and felt a profound sense of closure. The circle was complete. The story, once a source of division, had become a bridge. It had been a journey from a dismissed memory to a discovered letter, from a historical recording to a faded photograph, and finally, to this moment of understanding in a quiet backyard. The Village of Joy had, all these decades later, welcomed one more citizen into its fold, teaching its lesson of unexpected kindness all over again. Host, what an incredible journey of discovery. It just goes to show that the most powerful stories of resilience and humanity are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to listen. If this story of unexpected kindness and profound transformation moved you, if it made you see a piece of history in a new light, then do us a huge favor. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Your engagement is what allows us to unearth these hidden histories and bring them to you. So, subscribe to Chronicles of Heart and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. We have so many more tales of everyday people overcoming extraordinary challenges, and we can't wait to share them with you. Tell us in the comments, what did this story make you think about? Have you ever experienced an unexpected kindness that changed your perspective? We love hearing from you. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose to see the humanity in others